The rope snapped on the bridge at Ember Ridge, and the only thing standing between Ethan Cole and a 40-foot drop into the gorge was a creature the size of a bread loaf clinging to his shoulder like it had done this before. It had not done this before. Ethan grabbed the remaining rope with both hands, the fibers cutting into his palms like hot wire, and the creature on his shoulder, a gray, fox-like thing with one copper eye and one black eye and a face that suggested it found gravity personally offensive, did absolutely nothing useful. It yawned. Its breath smelled like burnt toast and something older, something like the inside of a kiln that had been cooling for 1,000 years. Really helpful, Ethan muttered through his teeth. He swung his legs, caught the edge of the broken plank, and hauled himself up and over the railing with the graceless determination of a man who had been told all his life that he did not belong and had decided to show up anyway. Below him, the river churned white. Above him, the tournament banners of the Continental Beast Tournament snapped in the wind like the jaws of something hungry. He was late. He was always late. And the creature on his shoulder, he called it Sable, because the first time he found it sleeping in his dead mother's garden it had been curled on a bed of sable-colored ash, had made them later by refusing to cross the bridge until it had finished staring at a beetle on the third plank for 9 full minutes. 9. He had counted. The registration tent sat at the base of the arena, a sprawling canvas structure that smelled like sweat, animal fur, and the sharp ozone tang of high-level mana. Ethan pushed through the flap and joined the back of a line that stretched 30 handlers deep. Every single one of them had a beast that made Sable look like a prank someone had played on the concept of danger. A boy near the front held a chain attached to an armored serpent whose scales threw off sparks when they scraped the ground. Behind him, a woman in a Northern Reach coat stood beside a frost hawk perched on a steel gauntlet, its feathers shimmering with a cold so intense the air around it looked bent. 3 handlers from House Drake, Ethan recognized the Crimson Crest, escorted something in a reinforced cage that growled in a frequency he felt in his back teeth. Sable sneezed. The boy with the serpent turned around, looked at Sable, and laughed so hard a piece of roasted grain shot out of his nose and hit Ethan's boot. "Sorry," the boy said, "not sorry at all. I thought that was a scarf." Ethan picked the grain off his boot and said nothing. He had learned, somewhere between his father's ruin and his mother's disappearance, that silence was cheaper than argument and lasted longer than anger. The line moved. He reached the registration clerk, a thin man with spectacles and the expression of someone who had processed 400 beast tamer pairs and wanted to process 0 more. Name: Ethan Cole. The clerk wrote it down without looking up. Beast classification: it does not have one. The clerk looked up. Every beast entered in this tournament requires a mana classification, an elemental alignment, and a registered rank. The clerk spoke the way people speak when they are reading from a rule they have memorized and resent. No classification, no entry. There is a provision, Ethan said, in Section 14 of the Tournament Charter. Unclassified beasts may enter under a U-stamp if the handler assumes full liability for any damage, injury, or uncontrolled mana discharge during competition. The clerk stared at him. Ethan stared back. Sable licked its own ear. The clerk stamped his form with a red U so hard the ink bled through to the table beneath. Tent assignment: Sector 9. Sector 9 was the supply area near the waste pits. Ethan had expected that. He took the form, tucked it into his coat, and walked out of the tent into a wall of noise and color that hit him like walking into someone else's life. The tournament grounds sprawled across the entire eastern plateau of Ember Ridge. 12 arena rings. 6 practice yards. Vendor stalls selling everything from mana-infused jerky to counterfeit beast rank certificates. Projection crystals floated above the main coliseum, broadcasting the pre-tournament ceremonies to every major city on the continent. This was the largest gathering of beast tamers in a decade, and somewhere in the middle of it, a boy with no family name worth speaking and a creature with no measurable power was supposed to compete. He found Sector 9. It smelled exactly the way a supply tent near waste pits should smell. The cot was thin. The blanket was thinner. A water basin sat in the corner with a crack running down its side like a river on a map to nowhere. Sable jumped from his shoulder to the cot, circled 3 times, and lay down. "We are going to die in the first round," Ethan told it. Sable closed its eyes. Its copper eye dimmed last, like a coal going out. Ethan sat on the ground beside the cot and pulled out a folded piece of cloth from the inside pocket of his coat. It was old. The edges were frayed to threads. Stitched into its center was a crest, a coiled WYRM eating its own fire, done in silver thread that had gone dark with age. The Dren family crest. His mother's bloodline. The name he did not use because using it invited questions, and the answers to those questions lived in rooms he had locked shut inside himself years ago. He ran his thumb across the stitching. His mother had vanished when he was 11. Not died. Vanished. There was a difference, and the difference was that death gave you a place to put your grief. Vanishing gave you a hallway with no doors. His father had handled it by not handling it. The drinking came first, then the silence, then the night he walked into a spirit marsh on the western border and came back wrong. Not wrong like injured. Wrong like erased. His body continued. The man who had lived inside it did not. Ethan was 14 when he became the last functioning member of the Cole household. He sold what he could. He kept what mattered. What mattered fit in one coat pocket and slept on his shoulder. He had found Sable 2 years after his mother disappeared, curled in the ash of her garden. The garden had burned the night she left. Nothing had grown there since. But Sable was there, sleeping in the center of the dead ground like it had been planted, like it was the one thing she had left behind on purpose. It had no mana signature. No elemental breath. No rank. Every beast assessor he brought it to gave him the same look, a mixture of pity and confusion, like watching someone try to register a house cat for a cavalry charge. But Sable dreamed. Every night it dreamed, and every morning the ground beneath where it had slept was ash. Not burnt. Not scorched. Ash. As if the earth itself had simply given up being solid. Ethan had stopped asking what that meant. He had started asking what it would become. The tournament was his answer. Not because he expected to win. Because he expected to be seen. Somewhere in the archives of the Continental Beast Authority, there was a record of the Dren bloodline and what they had once bonded with, and that record had been sealed for reasons no one alive seemed willing to explain. If he competed, if Sable did even one thing that defied classification, someone with access to those records would have to open them. He needed a door. This was the only hallway left. The noise outside his tent shifted. Footsteps. Laughter. He heard his name spoken twice, each time followed by a sound that landed somewhere between amusement and disbelief. He pulled back the tent flap and looked out. A cluster of handlers had gathered near the Sector 9 boundary, and 2 of them, young men in house-drake colors, were projecting something from a crystal. It was an image of Ethan at the registration desk, Sable sitting on his shoulder, the clerk's face frozen mid-disbelief. Someone had added text beneath the image. It read, unclassified and unserious. The group laughed. One of them noticed Ethan watching and waved, the kind of wave you give a child who has wandered into a room meant for adults. Ethan let the flap fall shut. He sat back down beside the cot and put his hand on Sable's back. The creature's fur was warm. Not warm like a living body. Warm like a stone that had been sitting in the sun for 100 years and still had not finished absorbing all the heat it was owed. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "We show them tomorrow." Sable's ear twitched. Beneath its closed lids, the copper eye flickered. Just once. Just enough that the shadow it cast on the tent wall was not the shadow of a small gray fox. It was the shadow of something with wings. But Ethan was looking at the crest in his hands, and he did not see it. Outside, the tournament drums began to beat. The ground shook with the footsteps of 1,000 handlers and their beasts, all of them ranked, classified, measured, and understood. Inside a supply tent near the waste pits, a boy who had been written off held a piece of cloth that meant everything and a creature that meant more, and the only thing louder than the drums was the silence between his heartbeats where hope used to live and something fiercer had moved in. The first night at the tournament grounds passed the way difficult nights always do, slowly, and full of sounds that did not belong to him. Through the thin canvas walls, Ethan heard handlers talking to their beasts in low voices, the click and scrape of claws on stone, the occasional roar that set off a chain reaction of growls and shrieks across the entire encampment until someone shouted and the noise settled back into an uneasy hum. Sable slept through all of it. Ethan did not sleep at all. He lay on the ground beside the cot. He had given Sable the cot because the creature refused to sleep on anything that did not have a mattress, which was a preference Ethan found unreasonable and deeply annoying and also impossible to argue with, and stared at the canvas ceiling and thought about every decision that had brought him to this exact point. He was 23 years old. He had no formal beast taming certification. He had no sponsor, no house affiliation, no mentor, and no money beyond the 40 coins he had earned fixing fences on a ranch outside the capital for 3 months. Those 40 coins had bought his entry fee, his travel, and 1 meal a day for the duration of the tournament. If he was eliminated in the first round, he would have enough left to walk home. Not ride. Walk. He thought about his mother. He tried not to, but the crest was in his pocket and the fabric still smelled faintly of her workshop, iron and dried lavender and something sharper underneath, something that pricked the inside of his nose the way tears prick the backs of your eyes. She had been a beast tamer. One of the best, if the old stories were true. The Dren line had produced tamers for 6 generations, each one bonded to creatures that pushed the boundaries of what the Beast Codex could classify. His grandmother had bonded with a storm-class leviathan. His great-uncle had tamed a creature so rare the Codex had created an entirely new category just to contain it. And then the records had been sealed. The Dren name had been removed from the active registry. His mother had disappeared. And nobody, not the Beast Authority, not the tournament officials, not the archivists in the capital, would tell him why. Sable stirred on the cot. Its paws twitched. Its mouth opened slightly, and for a half-second, something glowed at the back of its throat, not fire, not light, but the suggestion of both, like looking at an ember through frosted glass. Then it settled, and the glow was gone, and the tent was dark again. Ethan closed his eyes. Sleep would not come, but closing his eyes was the closest thing he had to surrender, and sometimes the body took what it could get. In the morning, the qualifying rounds would begin. 50 pairs would enter the crucible ring. Most would be eliminated before noon. The strongest would advance to the bracket stage, where the real competition started and the real politics revealed themselves. Ethan did not care about winning. He cared about lasting long enough to force someone to explain what Sable was. Because something was coming. He could feel it the way you feel weather changing, not in the sky but in your joints, in the pressure behind your eyes, in the way the air sits heavier on your skin than it should. Sable was changing. Every week its fur grew slightly darker. Every month its shadow fell at angles that did not match its body. And every night, without fail, the ground beneath it turned to ash. Something was waking up inside that small gray shape. And Ethan Cole, last of a bloodline no one remembered, was the only person alive who knew it was there. The horn sounded at dawn, a single note that cut through the camp like a blade through water, and 50 beast tamer pairs began moving toward the crucible ring with the focused intensity of people who had trained their entire lives for this moment. Ethan had trained for nothing. He had prepared for everything. There is a difference. The crucible ring was the largest of the 12 arenas, a circular pit carved into the bedrock of Ember Ridge, ringed by tiered seating that rose 60 rows high and held 12,000 spectators. The floor was made of compacted gray stone treated with mana-dampening resin, which meant that whatever happened down there, the audience would be safe. The competitors were on their own. Ethan entered through the eastern gate, sable draped across his shoulder with the limp confidence of a creature that had never once doubted its right to be carried. Around him, handlers led their beasts on chains, in cages, on reinforced leashes that hummed with containment spells. The serpent boy from registration was there, his armored snake coiled around his forearm like a gauntlet made of muscle and sparks. The frost hawk tamer stood near the western gate, her bird perched on its steel rest, radiating cold invisible waves that made the air shimmer. And at the center of the staging area, surrounded by 4 handlers in crimson, stood Owen Drake. Owen was the kind of person rooms rearranged themselves around. Not because he demanded it. Because his presence was a gravity well that pulled attention the way a drain pulls water, effortlessly, inevitably, and with the quiet certainty that everything nearby would eventually end up where he wanted it. He was 25, heir to House Drake, and his bonded beast was a crimson mane lion named Solus that had been classified S rank before Owen had turned 20. Solus stood beside him now, a creature the size of a small horse with a mane that burned, actual fire, tongues of deep red flame that licked the air around its head and cast shifting shadows across the arena floor. Its eyes were molten gold. Its paws left scorch marks on the treated stone. Owen glanced at Ethan as he passed. The glance lasted less than a second. It contained everything. Ethan was measured, categorized, and dismissed in the time it took Owen's eyes to move from left to right. Sable sneezed on Ethan's shoulder, and a handler nearby flinched. The qualifying round worked like this. The Crucible Ring would generate shadow constructs, mana-formed creatures pulled from a template archive and scaled to mid-tier combat levels. Each pair would face one construct. Destroy it, and you advance. Fail, and you are out. Time is measured. Style is noted. The judges score not just victory but efficiency, control, and the bond between handler and beast. The judges sat in an elevated box on the northern side of the ring, 5 of them in formal robes, each representing a different branch of the beast authority. Ethan recognized none of them except one, a woman in her 70s with silver hair pulled back so tightly it looked like it was trying to leave her head. Grace Hartley. She had been on the authority board for 40 years. She had known his mother. He knew this because Grace Hartley's signature was on the document that sealed the Dren family records. The first 10 pairs went through with the efficiency of a machine. Constructs spawned. Beasts attacked. Constructs crumbled. The crowd cheered the impressive ones and grew restless during the predictable ones. The Serpent Boy scored high. His beast shattered its construct with a tail strike that cracked the arena floor and drew a standing ovation from the lower rows. The Frost Hawk Tamer went next and scored higher. Her bird executed a diving blizzard assault that froze the construct solid before shattering it with a wing strike so precise the judges marked it with a notation Ethan had only ever read about in textbooks. Her name was Lucy Penn, and the way she moved with her hawk suggested a bond so deep it was less partnership and more shared nervous system. She walked out of the ring without looking at anyone. 20 pairs in, the crowd was warm. 30 pairs in, they were getting comfortable. 35 pairs in, a handler from the southern reach lost control of his beast, a rock lizard that panicked and tried to climb the arena wall, and the crowd laughed in the cruel, relieved way crowds laugh when someone else fails publicly. Pair 42. Ethan Cole and Sable. He walked to the center of the ring, and the crowd did what he expected. They went quiet first, the way people go quiet when they are trying to figure out if what they are seeing is a joke. Then the murmuring started. Then the laughter. Not mean laughter, not yet. Confused laughter. The kind that says, I do not understand what I am looking at, and the easiest response is to find it funny. Sable sat on the arena floor. It did not take a combat stance. It did not growl, crouch, coil, or display any of the pre-combat behaviors listed in the Beast Handler's manual under readiness indicators. It sat. Its tail curled around its paws. Its mismatched eyes, one copper, one black, looked at the arena wall with the distant interest of a tourist in a museum it did not particularly care for. The crucible activated. The mana channels in the floor lit up with pale blue lines, converging at a point 15 meters from where Ethan stood. The air above that point thickened, darkened, and a shadow construct pulled itself into existence, a lupin shape, all angles and speed, with claws that dripped residual mana and a mouth full of teeth made from compressed shadow energy. It was fast. Mid-tier constructs always were. They lacked the raw power of high-tier spawns but compensated with speed, aggression, and an attack pattern that gave handlers about 4 seconds to respond before contact. The construct locked onto Sable and lunged. Ethan did not move. He did not give a command. He did not signal, whistle, gesture, or do any of the 18 registered handler-beast communication methods listed in the tournament protocol. He stood very still and watched the thing he had been watching every night for 2 years happen in daylight for the first time. Sable opened its mouth. No fire came out. No ice, no lightning, no mana blast, no elemental wave. What came out was something Ethan did not have a word for, and neither did anyone else. It was a sound, but calling it a sound was like calling the ocean a puddle. It existed below hearing and above feeling, in a register that the human body processed not through ears but through the spaces between bones, through the hollow places in the chest where breath lives. The construct was 6 meters away when the sound hit it. It buckled. Not broke. Buckled. The way metal buckles under pressure it was never designed to bear. Its shape compressed inward, its edges folded, its form crumpled like paper crushed in a fist that was not there, and in less time than it takes to blink, the construct was gone. Not shattered. Not destroyed. Reduced to a fine gray dust that settled on the arena floor in a perfect circle around where Sable sat. Sable closed its mouth. The arena was silent. Not the impressed silence that followed the Frosthawk's display. Not the entertained silence that followed the Serpent's power. This was a different kind of silence, the kind that happens when 12,000 people see something they cannot explain and their brains refuse to process it fast enough to generate a response. In the judges' box, 4 of the 5 were staring at their instruments. The mana readers showed nothing. The elemental sensors showed nothing. The power level indicators showed nothing. According to every piece of measurement equipment in the arena, Sable had produced 0 output, and the construct had spontaneously ceased to exist. Grace Hartley was not looking at her instruments. She was looking at Ethan. Her hands were flat on the desk in front of her, and they were not steady. Not shaking from age. Not trembling from cold. They moved with the particular vibration of a person who is seeing something they hoped they would never see again. The head judge cleared his throat, checked his instruments one more time, and announced the result. Pair 42. Construct eliminated. Time, 2.7 seconds. Classification, pending further review. The crowd murmured. Pending further review was not a phrase anyone had ever heard in a qualifying round. You either passed or you did not. There was no middle category. But then Grace Hartley spoke, and when she spoke, the other judges listened, because Grace Hartley had been sitting in that box since before most of them were born, and the weight of her voice was not volume. It was decades. The pair advances, she said. Under standard qualifying protocol. Next. Ethan picked Sable up from the arena floor. The creature was already half asleep. He carried it back through the eastern gate, past 41 pairs who had fought with everything they had, and he said nothing to anyone, and no one said anything to him. The murmuring behind him sounded different now. The laughter was gone. What replaced it did not have a name yet, but it sat in the gut the way unease sits, heavy, warm, and impossible to ignore. In the judges' box, after the remaining pairs had finished, Grace Hartley stayed behind while the other judges filed out. She sat alone in the empty box and looked at the circle of gray dust that still marked the arena floor where the construct had been. A technician came in to clean it. He swept the dust into a pan, looked at it, and stopped. The dust was warm. He reported this to his supervisor. His supervisor reported it to the head judge. The head judge reported it to nobody, because by the time the report reached his desk, he had already decided that whatever Ethan Cole's creature was, it was not his problem, and he intended to keep it that way. Grace Hartley knew better. She had seen that dust before. 20 years ago, in a sealed chamber beneath the Beast Authority archives, on the night the Dren family records were locked away and a woman named Elaine Dren looked her in the eye and said, "Keep them sealed until the creature chooses." Grace had asked what that meant. Elaine had smiled the way people smile when they know something that will ruin them and have accepted it. Grace never saw her again. And now, sitting in the empty judge's box with the tournament drums still echoing off the arena walls, she understood what "until the creature chooses" meant, because the creature had chosen a boy with no rank and no name and no power, and it had sat on the arena floor like a house cat and unmade a shadow construct with a sound that should not exist, and it had done it in 2.7 seconds, and it was still growing. She reached into her robe and pulled out a sealed envelope she had carried for 20 years. The seal was unbroken. The handwriting on the front was Elaine's. It said, "When it wakes, give him this." Grace put the envelope back. Not yet. Not until she was sure. But her hands were still trembling, and she could not make them stop. Back in Sector 9, Ethan set Sable on the cot and sat on the ground with his back against the tent pole. His hands were steady. They had been steady the whole time, which surprised him, because inside his chest there was a storm system the size of a continent and it was spinning fast enough to strip paint. He had not known what Sable would do. That was the truth he kept pressed flat beneath his ribs where no one could see it. Every night he watched the creature dream and the ground turn to ash and the shadows fall wrong, and every night he told himself, "Tomorrow it will show me what it is." And every morning Sable woke up and yawned and demanded to be carried and showed him nothing at all. Until today. 2.7 seconds. Zero measurable output. One construct reduced to warm dust. Ethan pressed his palms against his eyes and breathed. Outside his tent, the camp was shifting. He could hear it the way you hear weather changing, not in individual sounds but in the overall texture of the noise. Before the qualifying round, the sounds near Sector 9 had been dismissive. Laughter, jokes, the easy cruelty of people who had already decided he was not worth the space he occupied. Now the sounds were different. Quieter. More deliberate. People walked past his tent and did not speak, which was louder than anything they could have said. He pulled his hands away from his eyes and looked at Sable. The creature was curled on the cot, its breathing slow and even, its gray fur catching the fading light through the canvas in a way that made it look almost silver. Its copper eye was closed. Its black eye was open, and it was looking directly at him. Ethan held its gaze. There was something in that black eye. Not intelligence, exactly. Intelligence was too small a word. It was awareness, the kind that existed in creatures old enough to remember when the world was shaped differently, when the rules were not yet written because the things that would break them had not yet been named. "What are you?" Ethan whispered. Sable blinked its black eye slowly, deliberately, like a cat that has heard a question it considers beneath it. Then it closed the eye and went to sleep, and the conversation was over. Ethan leaned his head back against the tent pole and closed his own eyes. Tomorrow the bracket rounds would begin. Tomorrow the real competition started. And somewhere in this tournament, someone was going to ask him the same question he had just asked Sable, and he was going to need an answer that did not begin and end with "I do not know." But that was tomorrow. Tonight he had earned one thing he had not had in a very long time. A reason to stay. Owen Drake did not attend the qualifying round. He did not need to. S-rank holders received automatic advancement to the bracket stage, a privilege reserved for the top 8 ranked beast tamer pairs on the continent. Owen was ranked second. The pair ranked first had retired 3 years ago, which meant Owen had been the best active competitor in the world for 36 months, and the only thing more dangerous than his beast was his certainty that this was exactly how things should be. He sat in his private tent, which was not a tent so much as a temporary residence, with actual furniture and a rug and a projection crystal that displayed tournament feeds on a wall-sized screen, and watched the replay of Ethan Cole's qualifying round for the 4th time. His chief handler, a man named Gregory Stone, stood behind him and said nothing, because Gregory Stone had worked for House Drake long enough to know that Owen's silence was not an invitation to speak. It was a perimeter. You stood outside it and waited. Owen watched the construct buckle. He watched it fold inward. He watched the dust settle in its perfect circle. He watched the instrument's red 0 on every metric. Pull his background, Owen said. Gregory left the tent. He returned 20 minutes later with a file that should have taken 2 days to compile, which told Ethan everything he needed to know about the resources House Drake brought to a tournament. The file was thin. Ethan Cole. Age 23. No formal certification. No house affiliation. No sponsor. Parents listed as Marcus Cole, status incapacitated, and Elaine Dren, status unknown. Gregory read the name aloud and watched Owen's face. Owen's face did not change. Dren, Owen said. The records are sealed. I know they are sealed. I want to know why they are sealed. The seal was placed by the Beast Authority 20 years ago under a Section 31 order. Access requires the signature of 3 sitting authority members or a direct mandate from the Crown. Owen leaned back in his chair. The projection crystal behind him continued to loop the footage. The construct buckling. The dust settling. The instruments reading 0. His creature has no classification, Owen said. No mana signature. No elemental alignment. And it destroyed a mid-tier construct in under 3 seconds. Correct. Either the construct was defective, or the measurement equipment is incapable of reading whatever that creature produces. Gregory said nothing. Find out which one, Owen said. Gregory left again. This time he went to the equipment technicians, then to the construct architects, then to the records division of the Tournament Authority. He was gone for 2 hours. When he came back, his face had changed in a way that Owen noticed immediately, because Gregory Stone's face did not change unless something had gone wrong in a category he did not have a contingency for. The construct was not defective, Gregory said. The architects confirmed it was standard template, mid-tier, fully functional. 3 separate diagnostics before deployment. And the equipment? Also functional. Calibrated that morning. The technicians ran a full audit after the qualifying round. Every sensor, every reader, every measurement tool in the arena was operating within normal parameters. Owen stared at him. Meaning the creature produced an output that the instruments cannot detect, Gregory said. Not that they malfunctioned. That the output exists in a register they were not built to measure. Owen turned back to the projection crystal. He watched the replay one more time. 5 times total now. He watched Sable sit on the arena floor. He watched it open its mouth. He watched the construct die. What register? Owen said. Unknown. The authority's chief physicist has been pulled in for consultation. She is requesting a private demonstration before the bracket rounds, but Cole has not responded to any communication. Owen stood up. Solus, who had been lying in the corner of the tent like a furnace someone had forgotten to turn off, raised its massive head. Its mane flickered. The temperature in the tent rose 3 degrees. I will talk to him, Owen said. That is inadvisable. The tournament protocol forbids direct competitor interaction outside of sanctioned social events. Then it will be a social event. Owen Drake walked out of his tent and crossed the tournament grounds in a straight line, because Owen Drake did not take indirect routes to anything, and the crowd parted around him the way water parts around the bow of a ship. Not because he pushed but because the alternative was to be in his way, and people who were in Owen Drake's way did not tend to enjoy the experience. He found Sector 9. He found Ethan's tent. He stood outside it. Cole. Inside the tent, Ethan was wrapping his left hand with a cloth strip because the rope burns from the bridge had started bleeding again. Sable was asleep on the cot. When Owen's voice came through the canvas, Sable's copper eye opened. Just the copper one. Ethan finished wrapping his hand and opened the tent flap. Owen Drake stood in front of him, and seeing Owen Drake up close was like standing next to a building you had only ever seen from a distance. The scale was disorienting, the details were sharper than expected, and the overwhelming sensation was that you had been wrong about how much space one person could occupy. He was tall. Not just in height. In presence. The kind of presence that made Ethan feel like the air around him was being taxed for the privilege of existing. Behind Owen, at the edge of Sector 9, Solus waited. Its mane burned low and steady, and its gold eyes tracked Ethan with the calm focus of a predator that has no need to hurry because it has never once needed to. "That is an interesting creature you have," Owen said. "Thank you. I did not say it was good. I said it was interesting." Ethan looked at Owen. Owen looked at Ethan. Between them, the kind of silence that happens when two people are measuring each other and neither intends to blink first. "What do you want?" Ethan said. "To understand what I am dealing with." "You are dealing with a competitor in a tournament. The same as everyone else." Owen smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who has found a puzzle and is deciding whether to solve it or step on it. "The Dren name," Owen said. "Your mother's line." Ethan's hand tightened on the tent flap. The rope burns screamed. He kept his face still. "I know the name," Owen continued. "My family's archives go back further than the authorities. The Dren line bonded with something the Codex could not classify. Something that predated the Codex itself. If you know all of that, you do not need to talk to me. I need to know if your creature is what I think it is." "And what do you think it is?" Owen looked past Ethan into the tent. Sable was sitting up on the cot now, both eyes open, copper and black, and it was staring at Owen with an expression that did not belong on the face of a small gray fox. It was the expression of something ancient recognizing something familiar and deciding whether it was worth the effort of caring. Owen's smile faded. "I think," he said slowly, "that you are either the bravest person in this tournament or the most reckless, and I have not decided which outcome concerns me more." He turned and walked away. Solus fell into step beside him. The crimson maned lion looked back at the tent once, and for a fraction of a second, its confident stride faltered. Not much. A half step. A hesitation so brief that only someone watching very carefully would have caught it. Ethan was watching very carefully. He let the tent flap close and looked at Sable. The creature was still staring at the spot where Owen had stood, and for the first time since Ethan had found it in the ash of his mother's garden, it was growling. Low. Barely audible. A vibration more than a sound, like the warning hum of a machine about to start. "Easy," Ethan said. Sable stopped growling. It looked at Ethan with its mismatched eyes, and something passed between them, not language, not telepathy, but something older than both. An agreement. A pact made in a register humans did not have words for. Ethan sat down beside the cot and put his hand on Sable's back. The fur was hotter than before. Not warm. Hot. The kind of hot that makes you pull your hand back before your brain catches up. He did not pull his hand back. That night, Grace Hartley came to Sector 9. She came alone, which was unusual for a senior judge, and she came after dark, which was unusual for anyone in a position of authority at a tournament that ran on visibility and public record. She stood outside Ethan's tent the way Owen had, but where Owen had announced himself like a weather event, Grace Hartley simply waited. Ethan heard her breathing. Old lungs. Careful breaths. He opened the flap. She was smaller than he expected. The judge's box added height and gravitas that did not survive the transition to ground level. She looked her age, 73, maybe older, but her eyes were sharp in a way that had nothing to do with youth and everything to do with having seen enough to know exactly what mattered. "May I come in?" she said. He stepped aside. She entered the tent, looked at the cot, the cracked water basin, the thin blanket, and she did not comment on any of it. Her eyes went to Sable. The creature was awake. Both eyes open. It watched Grace Hartley the way it had watched Owen, but without the growl. Without the tension. It watched her the way you watch someone you have been expecting. Grace sat on the ground, not on the cot, not on the single stool, on the ground, with her back against the tent pole, and she looked at Sable for a long time. "I knew your mother," she said finally. "I know. She was the best beast tamer I ever saw. And I have seen 4 generations of them come through this tournament." Ethan said nothing. "The night she disappeared, she came to me. She had that creature with her, but it did not look like this. It was larger then. Much larger. It filled the room. And when it breathed, the candles went out and the shadows moved in directions they should not have been able to move." Sable's ears twitched. "She told me she needed to compress it." Those were her words. Compress. She said the authority was coming for it, and she needed to make it small enough to hide, and the compression would cost her something she could not get back. Grace looked at Ethan, and her eyes were wet. "She asked me to seal the records. To protect the bloodline until the creature was ready to unfold again. I asked her what that meant. She said I would know when it happened because the instruments would read 0 and the ground would turn to ash." Ethan's breath stopped. His hand was still on Sable's back. The heat pulsed beneath his palm like a second heartbeat. "I signed the seal order the next morning," Grace said. "I have carried this for 20 years. She reached into her robe and pulled out the envelope. The old paper. The unbroken seal. Elaine's handwriting on the front. She held it out to Ethan. "She told me to give this to you when it woke," Grace said. "I believe it is waking." Ethan took the envelope. It was light. Almost nothing in it. He held it the way you hold something that could be a gift or a grenade, and his hands were not steady now, not even close. The rope burns on his left palm bled through the wrapping. He did not feel them. "Does it dream?" Grace asked. "Every night." "And the ash?" "Every morning." Grace nodded. She put her hands on her knees and pushed herself to her feet. Standing, she was barely taller than Ethan sitting. "Forfeit," she said. "Leave tonight. Take the creature and disappear the way your mother did." No. She had expected that. He could see it in the way she closed her eyes, not surprise, but confirmation. The Dren's stubbornness. Elaine had it. Her son had inherited it the way he had inherited the crest and the creature and the name that nobody wanted him to carry. "Then be ready," Grace said. "Because Owen Drake's people are already digging, and what they find will not make them cautious. It will make them desperate." She left the tent. Ethan sat alone with the envelope in his hands and the creature on the cot and the sound of the tournament drums fading into the night. He did not open the envelope. Not yet. Not until he understood enough to deserve whatever was inside. Sable put its head on his knee. Its copper eye glowed faintly in the darkness, and beneath his palm, the creature's heartbeat matched his own, fast, uneven, and full of something that was not quite fear and not quite hope but lived in the exact space where both of them refused to look. Outside, the temperature dropped. Frost crept across the supply crates near the waste pits. And in the place where Grace Hartley had been standing, the ground was warm. Not burnt. Not scorched. Warm, the way a stone is warm after a century of sun. The sabotage came 3 hours before dawn. Ethan did not hear it. He had finally fallen asleep sitting up, the envelope tucked inside his coat, his hand still resting on Sable's back. The creature did not sleep. It lay on the cot with its eyes half open, and when the shadow crossed the tent flap, a shape that moved with the trained silence of someone paid to be invisible, Sable watched it the way a hawk watches a mouse that has wandered too far from cover. The shadow slipped a cloth sack through the gap at the bottom of the tent flap. Inside the sack was meat. Good meaty, fresh cut, well seasoned, the kind of thing that would attract any beast with a functioning nose. Buried at the center of each piece was a pellet of concentrated nullvine extract, a substance that suppressed mana output in bonded beasts for up to 72 hours. Legal in veterinary contexts. Illegal in competition. Untraceable within 6 hours. The shadow retreated. The sack sat on the ground, 3 feet from the cot. Sable slid off the cot without making a sound. It padded over to the sack on paws that did not quite touch the ground, a detail that would have terrified Ethan if he had been awake to see it, and nosed the cloth open. It ate the meat. All of it. Every piece. Including the nullvine pellets, which it chewed with the disinterested thoroughness of a creature consuming something that could not possibly harm it and knew it. Then it sat beside the empty sack, and its eyes changed. The copper eye turned gold. Not shifted. Not lightened. Turned gold the way a sunset turns the sky, completely, undeniably, from one state to another with no middle ground. The gold was deep and bright and it cast light on the inside of the tent, actual light, warm and amber, and the shadows on the canvas walls moved in directions they should not have been able to move. This lasted 3 minutes. Then the eye dimmed back to copper, and Sable returned to the cot, and the only evidence that anything had happened was the empty sack and the faint smell of burnt spice in the air and the fact that Sable was larger than it had been the night before. Not dramatically larger. An inch, maybe 2. But the proportions had shifted. The legs were slightly longer. The chest was slightly deeper. The fur along its spine was darker, almost black, and it lay flat in a way that suggested not softness but compression, like something folded tight and waiting to be unfolded. Ethan woke at dawn. He found the sack. He smelled the residue. He knew what nullvine was because his mother had kept a jar of it in her workshop for treating overstimulated beasts, and the smell was distinctive, sweet and slightly metallic, like pennies soaked in honey. He looked at Sable. Sable looked back at him with copper eyes and an expression that said, "I handled it." Ethan picked up the empty sack and walked out of the tent. The morning was cold and gray, and the tournament grounds were already stirring. He walked to the nearest waste bin and dropped the sack in. He did not report it. He did not confront anyone. He did not go to the judges or the tournament authority or the handlers from House Drake whose boot prints he could see in the soft ground outside his tent, 3 sets, evenly spaced, the prints of people who moved in formation. He said nothing, because saying something would change nothing, and the energy it would cost was energy he could not afford to spend. What he did was look at Sable, really look, and notice that the creature was bigger than yesterday. He put his hand on its back. The fur was hotter still. And somewhere beneath the fur, beneath the skin, beneath whatever passed for bone in a creature that had no classification and no measurable power, something was humming. Not a growl. Not a purr. A hum, like the sound a generator makes when it is running at capacity and the needle is pressing against the red line. "You ate it on purpose," Ethan said. Sable yawned. Its teeth caught the morning light. They glowed amber for half a second, and in that half second, Ethan saw something in the creature's mouth that should not have been there, a depth, a darkness behind the teeth, as if Sable's throat opened not into a body but into a space much larger than a small gray fox could contain. Then the yawn ended, and the mouth closed, and Sable was just Sable again, sitting on a cot in a supply tent near the waste pits, looking at its handler with the patient indifference of something that had decided, long ago, that this boy was worth waiting for. The bracket rounds began at noon. Ethan was ready. He was not prepared, preparation required information he did not have, but he was ready, in the way that people who have survived by stubbornness are always ready. Not for what was coming. For whatever came. The bracket round matched Ethan against Lucy Penn, the Frost Hawk tamer from the Northern Reach, and the moment the pairing was announced, the arena went from buzzing to roaring because everybody in those 12,000 seats knew two things at once. Lucy Penn was the best non-S-rank competitor in the field, and Ethan Cole was the wild card that nobody could measure, and whatever happened between them would either confirm the joke or end it. Lucy stood at the western gate. Her hawk, a steel-colored raptor with a wingspan wider than Ethan was tall, perched on her gauntlet and radiated cold. Not metaphorical cold. Physical, measurable, ice-forming cold. The air around it crystallized into fine white particles that drifted down like snow that had forgotten to wait for a cloud. Ethan stood at the eastern gate. Sable sat on his shoulder, slightly larger than yesterday, its fur darker along the spine, its copper eye catching the arena light with a warmth that had no business being in the same space as Lucy Penn's ice. The head judge announced the match. The rules for bracket rounds were different from qualifying. No constructs. Beast against beast. The match ended when one beast was subdued, one handler conceded, or one beast left the arena boundary. No lethal force. No handler engagement. Handlers stayed at their respective gates. The beasts fought alone. Lucy looked across the arena at Ethan and gave him a small nod. Not friendly. Not hostile. Professional. She respected the arena the way a surgeon respects an operating theater, with seriousness, precision, and the absolute absence of wasted motion. The horn sounded. Lucy's hawk launched. The bird hit the air like an arrow made of weather. Its wings beat once, twice, and on the third stroke the temperature in the arena dropped so fast the spectators in the lower rows could see their own breath. Frost crept across the stone floor in spreading fractals, crystalline patterns that raced outward from the hawk's flight path like cracks in glass. A blizzard-class assault. Level 4 cold generation. The kind of attack that froze the air in your lungs before you could exhale. Sable slid off Ethan's shoulder and landed on the arena floor. It did not flinch. It did not crouch. It stood on the spreading ice and began to walk. Walk. Not charge. Not leap. Not dodge. Walk, with the calm, unhurried pace of something crossing a room it owned, and where its paws touched the ice melted. Not slowly. Instantly. Each paw print was a circle of dark, dry stone in a spreading field of white frost, and the circles smoked, thin tendrils of vapor rising from the contact points like the arena floor was breathing. The hawk banked for a second pass. Lucy gave a sharp whistle, 2 notes, descending, and the bird changed trajectory, dropping into a diving attack that concentrated all of its cold output into a single focused beam aimed directly at Sable's position. The beam hit. The arena floor where Sable stood erupted in ice, a crystalline pillar that shot up 6 feet and encased the spot in frozen architecture so dense it cracked the treated stone beneath it. The crowd gasped. Lucy's expression did not change. She watched the ice pillar with the focus of someone who knew exactly how much punishment her hawk could deliver and was calculating whether it had been enough. It had not been enough. The ice cracked. Not from inside. From the outside. Hairline fractures spread across the surface of the pillar, and each fracture glowed amber, and the amber spread like veins of fire through the crystalline structure until the entire pillar was more light than ice, and then it collapsed, not shattered, not exploded. Collapsed, shedding its frozen form like old skin, and Sable stood in the center of the wreckage, untouched, its fur dry, its eyes bright, and its mouth open in what Ethan could only describe as a grin. The creature had not attacked. It had not fought back. It had simply refused to be contained, and its refusal had unmade the ice from the inside out. Lucy's hawk circled. The bird was confused. Its attack had landed perfectly, full power, direct hit, textbook execution, and the target was standing in the wreckage looking bored. Hawks were intelligent creatures. This one knew, on a level deeper than training, that what it had just hit should not be standing. Sable looked up. The hawk stopped. It hung in the air, wings spread, motionless, as if the sky had caught it and was holding it in place. Then, slowly, with the precise deliberation of a leaf settling on still water, the hawk descended. It did not dive. It did not attack. It descended feet first, talons retracted, and it landed, gently, carefully, with the bewildered obedience of a creature that did not understand what it was doing but could not stop doing it, at Sable's feet. And it bowed its head. The arena erupted. Not in cheers. In chaos. 12,000 people tried to understand what they had just seen and failed in 12,000 different ways. Handlers shouted. Spectators stood. The judges' box lit up with instrument readings that made no more sense than the qualifying round had, every sensor reading 0, every measurement tool reporting that nothing had happened, that the hawk had simply chosen to land. Lucy Penn did not shout. She did not react at all for 3 full seconds, which was the longest 3 seconds of her life. Then she spoke her hawk's name, one word, sharp as a blade, and the hawk lifted its head from Sable's feet and looked back at her. It did not return to her. It stayed where it was, beside a creature half its size, and it looked at Lucy with an expression that she had never seen from her bonded beast in 9 years of partnership. It looked at her the way a child looks at a parent when a stranger has said something the child recognizes as true but cannot explain. Then Lucy Penn did something nobody expected. She raised her hand, palm out, and conceded. The crowd went silent. Lucy Penn, ranked 7th on the continent, undefeated in bracket play for 3 consecutive seasons, the pride of the Northern Reach, conceded a match that was still technically in progress because her beast had been claimed by proximity, by a power that existed in no register the instruments could read, and she knew, with the cold clarity that defined everything she did, that forcing her hawk to fight would break something between them that could never be repaired. The hawk returned to her. It flew back to her gauntlet and settled there, and it was shaking. Not from cold. From something else. Something it had felt when Sable looked at it, and it looked back, and whatever passed between them rewrote the hierarchy in its ancient raptor brain. Lucy walked out of the arena without speaking. The crowd watched her go. She did not look at Ethan. She did not look at anyone. In the judges' box, 3 of the 5 judges called for immediate disqualification. The argument was loud, public, and ugly. The charges included unregistered mana use, illegal mental coercion of an opponent's beast, and violation of the fair combat protocols under Section 12 of the tournament charter. Grace Hartley listened to all of it. Then she spoke. I invoke the right of witness. The box went quiet. The other judges turned to her. 2 of them looked confused. 1 looked alarmed. The 4th, the youngest, a man who had been on the board for less than a year, looked at Grace Hartley the way people look at someone who has just pulled a pin from a grenade and is holding it calmly in front of them. The right of witness was old. Older than the tournament itself. It was written into the founding charter of the Beast Authority, and it stated that when an event occurs during sanctioned competition that has not been observed in 400 or more years, the competition must continue to completion for the purpose of documentation, and no disqualification may be issued until the event has been fully witnessed and recorded. The last recorded instance of a null-form sovereign was 423 years ago, Grace said. The codex entry was sealed 390 years ago. What we are witnessing is not a violation. It is a resurgence. You cannot invoke a 4-century-old protocol to override standing tournament rules, one of the judges said. I am not overriding anything, Grace replied. I am enforcing the oldest rule we have. The right of witness supersedes all other charter provisions. Read the founding document if you have forgotten. They had forgotten. All of them except Grace, who had spent 20 years waiting for this and had memorized every word of every provision that might apply when it finally arrived. The disqualification motion was tabled. The match result stood. Ethan Cole advanced to the final. The arena was locked. The tournament authority issued a no-exit order for all spectators, handlers, and staff. No one was to leave the grounds until the final match was completed. On the obsidian balcony above the judges' box, King Henry Ashworth, Alpha King of the Continental Territories, ruler of 11 provinces, commander of the Royal Beast Guard, and a man who had attended 67 tournament finals in his 30-year reign, leaned forward in his seat. His personal guard, a unit of 6 men and women who had protected the crown for a combined total of 90 years, noticed the lean. They had never seen it before. King Henry Ashworth did not lean forward. He sat like a statue in every public appearance, his posture a statement of authority so complete that movement itself seemed beneath him. He was leaning now. His eyes were on Sable, and they were not bored anymore. One of the guards, a woman named Claire Voss who had served the crown for 18 years, looked at the king's face and felt something she had not felt since the first year of her service. She felt afraid. Not of the king. Not of the creature. Of what was about to happen. Between the semi-final and the final, the tournament granted a 2-hour preparation window. Most handlers used it to rest their beasts, consult their strategies, and review their opponent's footage. Owen Drake used it to stand in the center of his private tent and do nothing. This was unusual. Gregory Stone stood at the entrance and watched his employer stand perfectly still for 11 minutes, which was the longest Gregory had ever seen Owen go without doing something productive. Owen was not a man who wasted time. He was not a man who wasted anything. Every action, every word, every decision Owen Drake made was calculated to produce a specific outcome, and the specific outcome was always the same: dominance. Not cruelty. Not malice. Dominance. The absolute certainty that he was the strongest thing in the room, and that this fact was as natural as gravity. For the first time since Gregory had known him, Owen did not look certain. The Nullvine did not work, Owen said. Gregory said nothing. I did not order the sabotage, Owen continued, and this was true. House Drake's handlers operated with considerable autonomy, and the decision to use Nullvine had been made by a man named Peter Locke, chief of competition strategy, who had weighed the risks and rewards and concluded that a creature with no measurable power could be neutralized by a standard suppressant. Peter Locke was currently standing outside the tent, waiting to be spoken to, and he had the expression of a man who knew he had made a miscalculation and was uncertain whether the consequences would be professional or personal. It ate the Nullvine, Owen said. It ate a concentrated mana suppressant, and it grew. Gregory shifted his weight from one foot to the other. That is not how Nullvine works. Nullvine suppresses mana production at the cellular level. It does not enhance anything. It does not feed anything. It suppresses. Unless. Owen stopped. Unless the creature does not use mana, he said. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Gregory Stone had ever heard. Mana was the foundation of every beast classification on the continent. Every rank, every elemental alignment, every measurement of power was based on mana output. A creature without mana was like a fish without water. The category did not exist because it did not need to exist, because everything that lived and fought and burned and froze did so through mana. This was not a theory. This was the fundamental law of the Beast Codex. And Sable broke it. Owen looked at Solus. The crimson mane lion lay in the corner, mane burning low, golden eyes watching its bonded handler with the patient loyalty of a creature that would walk into any arena and fight any opponent because its handler asked. Solus was S rank. Solus was the most powerful classified beast on the continent. Solus was fire and fury and 800 pounds of muscle and mana and 4 years of unbroken victory. And Owen was not certain it was enough. He knelt beside Solus and placed his hand on the lion's mane. The fire did not burn him, it never had, not since the day they bonded, when Owen was 19 and the lion was a cub, and the fire between them was a promise both of them understood without language. "One more," Owen said. Solus pressed its head against Owen's chest. The mane flared. The temperature in the tent spiked, and the air tasted like copper and heat and something primal, something that lived in the space between tamer and beast, where words were irrelevant and loyalty was a force as real as the flame. Owen stood up. "We fight," he said. Across the tournament grounds, in Sector 9, Ethan sat on the cot beside Sable and held the envelope his mother had left him 20 years ago. He had not opened it. He was afraid to open it, and the fear was not the kind that makes you run. It was the kind that makes you sit very still and hold the thing that frightens you in your hands and feel the weight of it and know that once you break the seal, the shape of your life will change in a way you cannot undo. Sable pressed its head against his arm. The creature was larger again. Noticeably now. The size of a medium dog, where before it had been the size of a bread loaf. Its fur was almost black along the spine, and the copper eye burned with a steady amber light that did not flicker. After the fight, Ethan told it. "Win or lose. I will open it after." Sable looked at him with both eyes, one copper gold, one pure black, and blinked once. Ethan tucked the envelope back inside his coat, stood up, and walked toward the arena. The final was in 30 minutes. The drums were already beating. The final match of the Continental Beast Tournament was scheduled for high noon. It began 6 minutes early because the crowd refused to wait, and the tournament authority decided that 12,000 people chanting in unison was a scheduling force they could not override. The arena floor had been cleared, repaired, and retreated since the semifinal. The frost damage from Lucy Penn's hawk had been patched. The scorch marks from earlier rounds had been sanded smooth. The stone was clean and gray and flat, and it waited for what was about to happen with the patience of a surface that had absorbed 1,000 fights and would absorb 1,000 more. Owen Drake entered through the western gate, and the arena shook. Not from his footsteps. From the response. The crowd rose to its feet as a single organism, 12,000 people standing because their bodies told them to, because Owen Drake walking into a final was a sight that demanded vertical respect. He wore the crimson of House Drake. His posture was a column of controlled authority. Beside him, Solus walked with the easy confidence of a predator that had never lost, and its mane burned, deep red, high and hot, tongues of flame licking the air above its head in patterns that shifted with every step. The lion was enormous. 800 pounds of muscle beneath a hide of burnt gold, paws the size of dinner plates, claws that left grooves in the treated stone with every stride. Its eyes were molten, its breath was heat, and the air around it rippled the way air ripples above asphalt in summer. The western side of the arena was warm before Owen reached his gate position. The spectators in the first 3 rows felt it in their skin, in their lungs, in the fine hairs on their arms standing up because the body understands proximity to fire long before the mind processes the temperature. Then Ethan Cole entered through the eastern gate, and the arena did something it had never done in the recorded history of the tournament. It went quiet before the match began. Not a cheer. Not a gasp. Not a boo. Silence. The kind of silence that is not the absence of sound but the presence of attention so focused that sound cannot compete. Ethan walked to his gate position. Sable walked beside him. Not on his shoulder, the creature was too large for that now. It moved at his side like a shadow that had decided to become solid, its dark fur absorbing the arena light, its copper gold eye and its black eye scanning the arena floor with a focus that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition. Sable had been here before. Not this arena. Not this tournament. But here, in this moment, in this configuration of power and attention and challenge. It had been here before, in a memory older than its current body, and the recognition showed in the way it moved, the way it held its head, the way its paws touched the stone with a precision that spoke of practice measured in centuries. The head judge stood. He announced the match. The rules were the same as the semifinal, beast against beast, handlers at their gates, match ends on subdual, concession, or boundary exit. No lethal force. The head judge paused before giving the start signal. He looked at Grace Hartley. She nodded once. He looked at King Henry Ashworth's balcony. The king was standing. Not sitting. Standing at the edge of the balcony with his hands on the stone railing, and his presence from that height was a weight that pressed down on the arena like a hand on a chest. The horn sounded. Solus charged. The crimson maned lion crossed the arena in 3 seconds. Its paws hit the stone like detonations, crack, 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 each impact sending fractures through the treated surface. Its mane erupted. The low burn became a blaze, and the blaze became a wall of fire that rolled outward from the lion's body like a wave, consuming oxygen, warping light, turning the arena floor into a heat-fractured landscape of glowing stone and superheated air. 800 pounds of muscle and fire, moving at a speed that cracked the ground, aimed directly at a creature the size of a medium dog with dark fur and mismatched eyes. Sable did not move. Ethan stood at the eastern gate and did not breathe. His hands gripped the railing. His knuckles were white. His rope burns screamed beneath the wrapping. Every part of him wanted to shout, to command, to do something, anything, but the part of him that had lived with this creature for 11 years, the part that had watched it dream, watched the ground turn to ash, watched the shadows fall wrong, watched it eat poison and grow, that part knew better. He let go of the railing. Solus was 10 meters away. 5. 3. Sable opened its eyes. Both gold now. Both burning. The copper was gone. The black was gone. What replaced them was a light so deep it had color and weight and presence, a gold that was not yellow or amber or warm but all of these and older, the gold of the first light that ever hit the first surface and found it worth illuminating. The creature exhaled. And it unfolded. There was no other word for it. The small dark body did not grow. It did not expand. It unfolded, like a piece of paper that had been creased into the shape of a fox and was now returning to its original form, and the original form was not small, and it was not gray, and it was nothing that anyone in that arena or anyone alive on the continent had ever seen with waking eyes. The fur split along seams of golden light. The dark surface peeled back like bark from a trunk struck by lightning. Beneath it was something vast and deep and dark, a body made of compressed night and living fire, and it rose, upward, outward, unfolding layer after layer of mass and wing and horn, until it filled the space above the arena floor the way a thundercloud fills the sky, not by moving into empty space but by replacing what was there with something denser. Wings. Black and enormous, membrane-thin, veined with channels of amber light that pulsed in time with a heartbeat so deep the spectators felt it in their chests. A body long and muscular, scaled in dark iridescence that shifted between black and deep violet as the light hit it. And antlers, rising from a head that was both ancient and newly formed, branching into structures that the human eye struggled to process because they existed in geometries that had no right angles and no straight lines and seemed to occupy more space than the dimensions available. It was not a dragon. It was not a WIRM. It was not any beast in any codex ever written. It was something that predated the codex, that predated the classification system, that predated the understanding of what a beast could be. It was a null-form sovereign, the last entry ever made in the original Beast Codex, a single page, a single line, a single classification, unassignable. Not because it could not be measured. Because measurement itself was not adequate. This is what Elaine Dren had compressed into the shape of a sleeping fox and hidden in the ashes of her garden. This is what she had given her son, at a cost she could not get back. The arena was not silent now. It was beyond silence. It was in a state of acoustic failure, 12,000 people whose brains had stopped sending signals to their vocal cords because the visual input was consuming every available processing resource and there was nothing left over for sound. Solus, the Crimson Mane Lion, S-rank, undefeated, pride of House Drake, the most powerful classified beast on the continent, slid to a halt. Its claws gouged the stone. Its momentum died. Its mane, which had been a wall of fire 3 seconds ago, dropped to embers and then to nothing. The flames went out. Not reduced. Extinguished. As if the fire itself had looked at what stood before it and decided that burning was no longer an option it wanted to pursue. The lion dropped to its belly. All 800 pounds of it. Flat. Chin on the ground. Paws spread. Every line of its massive body pressed against the stone in a posture that had no ambiguity, total, absolute, unconditional submission. Not coerced. Not forced. Chosen, the way a creature with millions of years of predatory instinct chooses when it encounters something so far above its own station that fighting is not just pointless but conceptually absurd. Solus whimpered. A small sound from a massive animal. The sound of something that has never been afraid, discovering what fear feels like from the inside. Owen Drake stared at his bonded beast. His lion, his partner, his pride, the creature he had raised from a cub and fought beside for 6 years and trusted with his life, was lying flat on the arena floor in submission to something that should not exist. Owen's hands dropped to his sides. He did not concede. He did not speak. He stood at the western gate and looked at the creature that filled the arena sky, and his face did something that no one who knew Owen Drake had ever seen it do. It showed uncertainty. Not fear. Not defeat. Uncertainty. The expression of a man whose fundamental assumption about the world, that he was the strongest thing in any room, had just been revised by reality, and the revision was not gentle. On the obsidian balcony, King Henry Ashworth moved. His guards reached for their weapons on instinct. 18 years of training fired in Claire Voss's muscles before her conscious mind could override it. Her hand was on the hilt of her sword before she understood what the king was doing. He was not in distress. He was not in danger. He was bowing. The Alpha King of the Continental Territories, ruler of 11 provinces, commander of the Royal Beast Guard, a man who had sat on a throne for 30 years and never once lowered his head to any living thing, bowed. Not deeply. Not the bow of a subordinate or a supplicant. The slight, measured incline of a sovereign acknowledging something that existed beyond the hierarchy he commanded. The bow was not submission. It was recognition. The recognition that there were things in the world older than kingdoms and more powerful than crowns, and that the correct response to encountering one was not fear but respect. Claire Voss took her hand off her sword. She looked at the king's face. He was not afraid. He was moved. In 30 years of service, she had never seen that. Below, in the arena, Ethan Cole stood at the eastern gate and looked up at the creature that had been Sable, that had slept on his cot and yawned at his breakfast and refused to walk across bridges until it had finished staring at beetles, and he did not cry, because crying required breath and his lungs had forgotten how to do that, but his eyes were full and his hands were shaking and his mother's crest was burning against his chest through the fabric of his coat like it knew. Like it knew what it was seeing and was proud. The creature, the sovereign, turned its vast head and looked down at Ethan. Its gold eyes, both of them, found his face. And in that look was everything that Sable had never been able to say in the body of a small gray fox, the recognition, the loyalty, the bond that had been waiting 11 years to be expressed in its true form. It lowered its head. Not in submission. In greeting. The way an old friend lowers their head when they see you across a room and want you to know that the years between do not matter, that the distance was temporary, that they were always here, always waiting, always yours. Ethan put his hand on the creature's lowered head. The scales were warm. Not hot. Warm, the way his mother's workshop had been warm, the way the crest against his chest was warm, the way Sable's fur had been warm every night for 11 years in a supply tent and a broken-down house and an ash-covered garden and every other place where Ethan Cole had been told he did not belong. The warmth was home. The head judge, whose voice had abandoned him for several seconds, managed 3 words. Match concluded. Winner. The crowd found its voice. The sound that came from 12,000 throats was not a cheer. It was something older than cheering, a sound that human beings make when they witness something that exceeds their understanding, and their only available response is noise, pure noise, the kind that comes from the chest and not the mouth, that vibrates in the bones and fills the spaces between heartbeats. In the judge's box, Grace Hartley wept. Not for the spectacle. Not for the tournament. She wept for Elaine Dren, who had compressed a sovereign into the shape of a fox and given up everything she was to do it, her power, her name, her presence in her son's life, so that one day, in an arena full of people who had mocked him, her boy would stand beside something that proved the Dren bloodline was not fallen, was not forgotten, was not a joke on a projection crystal with a red stamp that said unclassified. The Dren bloodline was the oldest line of beast tamers on the continent. And the creature they bonded with was the reason the Codex existed in the first place. Owen Drake walked to the center of the arena. Solus rose from its belly and followed, its mane rekindled to a low, respectful flame. Owen stopped 10 feet from Ethan and looked at him, and the uncertainty on his face settled into something else. Acknowledgement. "I was wrong about you," Owen said. Ethan looked at him. The creature above them, vast, dark, winged, antlered, luminous, breathed, and its breath smelled like the first fire and the last ember and everything between. "Everyone was," Ethan said. Owen almost smiled. Almost. The expression died before it reached his mouth, but his eyes carried it, and for Owen Drake, that was as close to warmth as he had ever come in public. He turned and walked out of the arena. The crowd parted. The king returned to his seat. The judges began the documentation process that would take 6 months and rewrite 300 pages of the Beast Codex. Ethan stood in the arena. The sovereign folded itself back down, not to the shape of a fox but to something between, a creature the size of a large dog with dark fur and gold eyes and wings that tucked against its body like folded arguments, and it pressed its head against Ethan's hip and breathed, and the ground where they stood was not ash. It was warm, dark soil. The kind that things grow from. Ethan reached into his coat and pulled out the envelope. He broke the seal. Inside was a single piece of paper with his mother's handwriting. 6 words. "It chose you. I chose you." He folded the paper and put it back inside his coat, next to the crest, and he stood in the center of the arena with a creature the world had forgotten beside a boy the world had dismissed, and the projection crystals carried the image across the continent, every city, every village, every outpost and border town, the image of a boy nobody remembered standing next to something nobody believed in, while a king who bowed to nothing bent his head. And 12,000 people, who had come to see a tournament, left having witnessed something else entirely. A beginning.